There's a strange paradox written into the lives of high achievers, a quiet contradiction that few notice until it begins to hurt. The people who burn out are rarely the lazy or the indifferent. They are the devoted ones, the disciplined, the ones who cared too much, like stars that collapse under their own brilliance. They do not fade from lack of light, but from too much pressure held too long. Imagine a runner sprinting toward a horizon that keeps retreating. Each milestone reached reveals another just beyond it. Applause echoes, medals glint, titles accumulate. Yet somewhere in the chest, a dull ache forms, not pain exactly, more like a question that has lost its words. Why am I tired? The mind asks, when I am doing everything right. Burnout rarely arrives as a thunderclap. It seeps in like dusk. First, joy thins. Then curiosity dulls. Motivation turns brittle. The body still moves, but the soul begins to lag behind, like a child dragged through an adult's schedule. You wake up exhausted not from effort alone, but from a deeper friction. The friction of becoming someone you no longer recognize. Here is the paradox. Achievement promises freedom, yet often delivers confinement. The latter was supposed to lead somewhere open and expansive, but rung by rung, it narrows the sky. You climb not because you love climbing anymore, but because stopping feels dangerous. Identity is now tied to momentum. If you slow down, who are you? High achievers often mistake burnout for a personal failure, a lack of resilience, a discipline problem. They ask, what's wrong with me? When the more honest question is, what have I been asking of myself? Psychologically, burnout is not caused by work alone. It is caused by meaning overload. Without meaning renewal, by effort without integration, by living as if your value must be constantly proven, as if rest were a reward to be earned rather than a rhythm to be honored. There's an ancient image from Eastern philosophy, the bowstring, pulled to tight snaps. To loose it cannot sing. Burnout is the sound of a snapped string, not because the archer lacked strength, but because they forgot to listen to the instrument. And listening is the beginning of wisdom. The modern world trains high achievers to ignore subtle signals. Fatigue becomes weakness. Doubt becomes inefficiency. Stillness becomes laziness. We celebrate the ones who push through pain, who override instinct, who power on. But the psyche keeps its own ledger, and eventually it collects. Burnout is not an enemy. It is a messenger, a whisper that becomes a scream only because it was ignored for too long. To understand it, we must look beneath behavior into belief, beneath habits into fear, beneath ambition into the hidden stories we tell ourselves about worth, safety, and love. That is where the real fire begins. Every high achiever is under a spell, though few would call it that. It feels like clarity, like purpose, like drive. But spells are strongest when they feel like truth. The spell says, if I keep going, I will finally rive. Rive at peace, rive at enough, rive at myself. From an early age, many high achievers learn a subtle lesson. Love is conditional. Praise comes when performance is high. Attention follows success. Safety is earned through excellence. Over time, achievement stops being something you do and becomes something you are, or worse, something you must continue being to remain worthy. Psychologically, this fuses identity with output. You are no longer a human who produces. You are production itself. Motion becomes proof of existence. Stillness feels like erasure. This is why rest can feel unbearable for high achievers. Silence is not neutral. It is threatening. In stillness, the questions return. Am I enough without doing? Am I lovable without winning? So the achiever keeps moving, not always toward joy, but away from fear. Burnout emerges when this avoidance strategy collapses, when the nervous system, exhausted by constant vigilance, can no longer maintain the illusion. The achiever doesn't just feel tired, they feel hollow, disconnected, as if the well they've been drawing from has gone dry. But the well was never dry. It was sealed. High achievers often sacrifice parts of themselves quietly. Playfulness, sensuality, grief, tenderness, time without purpose. These are not eliminated, they are postponed. Later, the achiever says, after I succeed. Yet, the psyche does not understand later. What is denied expression becomes pressure. What is not lived becomes weight. Burnout is the moment when all the unlived moments demand to be acknowledged at once. Notice how burnout is often accompanied by cynicism. The work that once felt meaningful now feels absurd. Goals that once energized now feel empty. This is not because meaning disappeared, but because meaning was outsourced, placed in outcomes rather than experience, in arrival rather than presence. The philosopher Kierkegaard warned of this long ago, that despair is not always despair over suffering, but despair over not being oneself. Burnout is precisely that, a quiet despair born from prolonged self-abandonment in the name of success, and yet, paradoxically, the achiever often resists this insight. Because if burnout is not a flaw but a signal, then the problem is not endurance. It is orientation. This realization to stabilize is the entire inner architecture. If striving harder won't save you, what will? If control is the problem, what happens? When you loosen your grip, the mind does not like this question, but the soul insists on it. At the heart of burnout lies a deep misunderstanding of control. High achievers are often masters of optimization, time, energy, strategy, effort. They learn to bend hours to their will, to compress life into efficient blocks, and for a while, it works. But time is not just a resource, it is a relationship. When life is treated as something to conquer, the nervous system never stands down. There's always something to manage, something to improve, something slipping through your fingers. Urgency becomes the default state. Even rest is scheduled, optimized, extracted for productivity gains. The body does not experience this as success. It experiences it as threat. Burnout is, at its core, a nervous system condition, a prolonged fight-or-flight response disguised as ambition. Cortisol replaces curiosity. Hyperfocus replaces wonder. The future cannibalizes the present. This is why burnout feels different from ordinary tiredness. Sleep does not restore it. Vacations do not cure it. Because the exhaustion is not muscular, it is existential. The body is saying, I cannot live at the speed of your expectations. And here is the cruel irony. The more a high achiever senses things slipping, the tighter they grip. More discipline, more control, more pressure, like trying to calm turbulent water by clenching your fists. But water responds to openness, not force. Ancient Taoist sages spoke of Wu Wei, effortless action, action aligned with the natural current. Burnout is what happens when action is forced long after alignment has been lost, when willpower replaces listening. You can hear this loss of listening in the language of burnout. I have to. I should. I can't stop. These are not statements of choice. They are confessions of captivity. And captivity always extracts a price. Burnout is not asking you to quit everything. It is asking you to stop waging war against time, to stop treating life as a problem to be solved rather than a rhythm to be felt. The achiever fears this shift because it sounds like surrender, like falling behind, like death of identity. But what if surrender is not collapse, but recalibration? What if the body shutting you down is not betrayal, but protection? What if exhaustion is intelligence? In Zen, there is a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Burnout is a harsh teacher, but an honest one. It teaches through sensation rather than theory, through limits rather than ideals. It says, you are not infinite. And that is not a flaw. To accept this is not to shrink. It is to finally live at a human scale. And from that scale, something long forgotten begins to return: breath, depth, presence. Not as tools, not as strategies, but as home. There comes a moment in burnout when the body speaks louder than the mind. Headaches that will not yield to logic. A chest that feels tight for no medical reason. A fatigue that sleep cannot touch. This is not malfunction. This is language. The body has always been the subconscious made visible. It records what the mind edits out. It remembers the pauses you skipped, the grief you postponed, the joy you rationed. Long before you admit you are exhausted, the body has already adjusted. Its tone, its posture, its chemistry. Modern psychology is only now catching up to what ancient traditions always knew. The body keeps the score of the soul. Burnout is not just cognitive overload. It is emotional backlog. A lifetime of swallowed no's, deferred desires, restrained tears, and delayed pleasures asking to be metabolized. High achievers are especially skilled at dissociation. They learn to override signals with narratives. Just one more push. This is temporary. Others have it worse. These stories are not lies. They are survival strategies. But survival is not the same as living. Eventually, dissociation fails. The body slows you down because the psyche cannot. It removes your appetite for what once drove you. It drains color from achievement so you are forced to notice the gray. This is why burnout can feel like betrayal. Why now? The achiever asks, after all I've done. But the body is not punishing you. It is rescuing what remains. There is a deep tenderness in this moment. Though it rarely feels that way at first, burnout strips away the persona, the competent one, the reliable one, the impressive one, and leaves you face to face with vulnerability, with dependency, with need. For high achievers, need feels dangerous. Need threatens autonomy. Need reminds you of childhood moments when asking was risky, when self-sufficiency became armor. So instead of asking, the achiever performs. Instead of resting, they produce. Instead of feeling, they function. Burnout breaks this pattern not by argument, but by force. You cannot optimize your way out of it. You cannot mindset your way through it. The very tools that brought you here will not take you home. This is the threshold moment, where healing requires a different intelligence, not the intelligence of control, but of attunement, learning to ask the body simple questions again. What do you need? What hurts? What feels alive? The answers are often inconvenient. They ask for slowness in a fast world, boundaries in a culture of access, presence in an economy of distraction. Yet within these answers is a forgotten intimacy, with sensation, with breath, with the present moment as it actually is. Burnout, when listened to, is not an ending. It is a return to embodiment, to a life lived from the inside out, beneath exhaustion, beneath cynicism, beneath the loss of motivation. There is often grief. Grief for the life you postponed, the self you sidelined, the loves that were conditional on your usefulness. Burnout exposes a painful truth. You cannot outrun your unlived life. Whatever you neglect in the name of success waits patiently. Play waits, rest waits, wonder waits, and when they are denied too long, they stop waiting quietly. High achievers often discover, in burnout, that they do not know how to enjoy without earning it. Pleasure feels suspicious, ease feels undeserved. Even love can feel transactional, given for performance, withdrawn for failure. This creates a profound loneliness, surrounded by achievement, yet unseen in essence, valued for what you do, not for what you are when you do nothing at all. Burnout is the psyche's protest against this loveless economy. It asks uncomfortable questions. Who am I if I stop striving? Who stays if I fail? What remains if I am not? Impressive, these questions hurt because they strike at attachment, not just to goals, but to approval, to identity, to the hope that one day success will grant permission to rest. But permission never comes from the outside. In many wisdom traditions, there's the idea of the false self, the constructed identity designed to survive, adapt, and be accepted. Burnout is what happens when the false self becomes a prison rather than a bridge. The grief of burnout is not just about fatigue. It is about realizing how long you have been living one step removed from yourself, and yet, within grief lies liberation. Because when the old bargains collapse, I will sacrifice now so I can live later. Something more honest can emerge, a different relationship to effort, to love, to time. You begin to sense that life is not a proving ground, but a meeting place. Not a race to win, but a conversation to participate in. This is where fear softens. When you allow yourself to be ordinary sometimes, when you let relationships see you without polish, when you rest without justification, burnout, then, becomes a rite of passage, a descent that strips away illusion so something truer can ascend. Not the achiever. The human. Integration is not about extinguishing the fire of ambition. It is about changing its shape. There is a difference between a wildfire and a hearth. One consumes indiscriminately, fueled by urgency and fear. The other warms, gathers, sustains. Both burn. Only one can be lived with. Healing from burnout does not mean abandoning excellence. It means befriending limits, understanding that rhythm, not intensity, is what makes life sustainable. That rest is not the opposite of work, but its companion. The sages knew this. They spoke of balance not as static equilibrium, but as dance, inhale and exhale, effort and ease, engagement and withdrawal. High achievers must relearn this dance slowly, awkwardly, with compassion for how unnatural it may feel at first. You begin by letting your worth be unproductive sometimes, by allowing days that leave no trace, by choosing depth over accumulation, presence over acceleration. You stop asking, "What more can I do?" and start asking, "What is enough?" This question is radical in a culture built on perpetual dissatisfaction, but it is also deeply peaceful. Burnout teaches you that the body is wiser than ideology, that meaning cannot be hoarded, that love grows in spaces where striving pauses. Over time, you may notice something subtle, returning, not the manic energy of early ambition, but a quieter vitality, a grounded aliveness, work that flows instead of grinds, rest that actually restores. You learn to trust cycles again, to let seasons change, to honor endings without panic. And perhaps, the deepest realization arrives softly like dawn. You were never meant to earn your right to exist. You were meant to participate, to feel, to be changed by what you touch. In the end, burnout is not the collapse of your life. It is the collapse of a false contract, one that said you must burn yourself to be worthy of warmth. When that contract dissolves, something timeless remains: breath, awareness, a life that no longer needs to be conquered, only lived.